name is Jonathan Drake, as you both know, and I'm part of the AAAS Scientific Responsibility Human Rights and Law program. Welcome to this Ask Me Anything session with Jeff Toney of Kean University, Harvard, and MIT, which is very impressive. We're very grateful to Dr. Toney for taking the time to be with us today. And before we get started and I turn the mic over to him, I just wanted to go over a few ground rules for today's session. Today's session will be approximately 60 to 90 minutes, and Dr. Toney will begin by introducing himself and sharing some brief remarks about the topic of this session, which is how we can engage university administration in bringing human rights to campus. After that, we'll open the floor to some questions. Please type your questions in the chat box, and when we get to them, we'll call on you and ask the question of Dr. Toney, or using your microphone as time allows. And since there are three of us currently here, I think microphones are probably fine for the time being until more people show up. Hello.
Hello.
This way we can ensure that we don't have multiple people talking over each other at once. So if you're not asking a question, we ask that you keep your mic on mute to avoid disrupting others. So thank you for joining us. And now I'll pass the mic virtually to Dr. Toney to begin the conversation.
Sure. Thank you, Jonathan. And I really appreciate the invitation. It was so nice to hear from my colleague, Teresa Harris and Jessica Wyndham to be part of this. I'm happy to share with right now as a small group that I've been involved in the coalition since it was launched in early 2009. So I'm deeply devoted to their mission. And so this afternoon's discussion is about how university administration working with the university community can bring human rights onto their campus to benefit students. And for me, it's always been about figuring out ways to better engage students. I'll share with you briefly that the university where I work, based in New Jersey, is highly diverse. We have more than 2 out of 3 students are students of color. The vast majority are first in their family to go to college. Most of them are in lower socioeconomic circumstance. They're coming from underserved communities. I share this because it makes it even more important to open their eyes to a broader global perspective, to learn about how to appreciate everything that they have being part of our society in the US. And our campus is also somewhat unique, as even though we're a predominantly undergraduate institution, we do offer some doctoral programs, but a small number. We have a Human Rights Institute right at the center of campus. Our previous university president, Dawood Farahi, his vision was to create a Human Rights Institute right in the hub of the campus, where we get the most student traffic on their way to what we call the Learning Commons, or commonly known as more like a library facility, and of course a big Starbucks to attract them. That Human Rights Institute is there to bring in thought leaders in human rights. I was delighted that when we launched it, actually in 2010, our keynote speaker was Kerry Kennedy. And I had the privilege to meet with her and hear her vision for the RFK Center for Human Rights. I'm just giving you a little bit of background. So how can we benefit students? I see it in the 3 categories that most university administrators think about. That's in teaching and learning and scholarship. So I would argue that it improves teaching, because I love the idea of using case studies in curriculum as a way to explain complex subjects. Certainly our students coming from all these different cultures, it can be a challenge to engage them on the same footing, especially in the STEM fields, right? You don't want to just give them a science textbook and say, we're going to learn these principles. I think it's much better if, for example, you're teaching chemistry, if you can draw in case studies that talk about, have you ever thought about the human right to water, the human right to nutrition, etc. And to talk about case studies to illustrate whatever principle that you wish to teach. And then on the faculty side, I see to this day so many rich opportunities in scholarship and research to think about whatever their main discipline is, how to connect it to human rights issues, to give them a chance to work with faculty across different fields. It's one of the things I really admire about the AAAS Science and Human Rights Coalition. It brings together faculty across a wide range of disciplines. I've been able to work with sociologists, with people who are more considered humanists, of course, engineers, STEM fields, et cetera. So that's just kind of a backdrop of my perspective of how people can bring human rights to their campus. Each university and college has its own culture, of course, so they have to figure out the best way to bring it to their students, but I'm happy to open it up to a discussion and hear your ideas, and as the session says, ask me anything.
So I think this discussion is really timely for me, and it's very exciting to be able to talk to such a small group that we can really maybe do some brainstorming. Jonathan, I haven't talked to you recently enough to tell you about what I'm kind of throwing around in my mind, but Tricia Hepner has left the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And she was really sort of the heart and soul of a program there called Disasters, Displacement, and Human Rights, or the DDHR program. And I graduated out of that program, and it's been something that's been really important to me. And I've considered trying to figure out a way to start something similar at my own university. So that was the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, where I finished my PhD, and I'm now at Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. So, a couple hundred miles away, different student population, different research objectives and whatnot at the university. But one of the things that was problematic for me was making sure that it wasn't something that would be in competition with UT's program, because my university has very different faculty expertise and resources. So since Trish is no longer at UT Knoxville and their program seems to be waning a little and going through sort of the changes associated with faculty moving on, I've sort of revisited this idea. So this is something that I'm kind of tossing around right now. I've not done any work on it. What I'm thinking is that it would probably be introduced into my university as an interdisciplinary minor to start. Mm-hmm. And then maybe we could expand it. We're primarily an undergraduate teaching institution, so we are not a research institution. We're in a fairly conservative community in Middle Tennessee. Right. And so, just thinking ahead to some of the challenges that we may face as we start sort of introducing some of these concepts. But some of the comments you made really resonated with me in terms of your student population. Most of MTSU students are first generation. We do have a sort of a diverse background when it comes to our student population. Mm-hmm. Middle Tennessee is a large center for Kurdish refugees. We also have several pockets of very Spanish-speaking communities within the Murfreesboro, Nashville area. So we've got those students sort of coming into our population as well. Mm-hmm. We just introduced a social justice minor within our sociology department. I'm actually part of the anthropology department. Okay. And I teach a forensic science and human rights course. And, I'd really like to bring more of that mm-hmm. into my teaching, whether I get this minor off the ground or not.
Right.
So I guess one of my questions would be is there any sort of pushback in terms of, are you part of a conservative community, or do you have any insight on how these things might be received?
Well, the way I would address that is that, like most universities, the best way to make sure that an initiative like that succeeds is, you've already mentioned about culture. So, certainly our area and the so-called tri-state, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, et cetera, it's obviously liberal. It's more open-minded about these kinds of discussions. So that's kind of off the table. But as far as university culture, that's a different story, right? I would argue that certainly the deans and the provosts at my level, the university president, need to be engaged. I mean, I'm lucky that I joined Kean University as a dean at the time. That was 12 years ago. And we had a university president who personally was driving it. So he was personally committed. So of course, everybody followed that example of wanting to be part of it. So as a faculty member, I would advise you to certainly speak with whoever's the department head or department chair, maybe set up a time with your dean, and also talk to people who are involved in curriculum development. If your university has something like a planning council or a college-wide curriculum committee or a university-wide curriculum committee, to think about how to talk with them of how to accomplish some of these things. I think the idea of a new minor, that's a pretty heavy lift, in my opinion. My thoughts and what I've seen work fairly well is to work with faculty at the course level and then use the case study kind of approach. If you're not already aware, AAAS Coalition has a really good resources on their website as far as syllabi, for example. I'm sure Jonathan knows this. You can search for STEM syllabi on the AAAS Coalition website, and you can pull out examples. I haven't looked at it for a while, Jonathan. Is it fairly comprehensive in terms of things like anthropology or?
That's not actually my, am I a mute? No, I'm not a mute. That's not my specialty. So I don't know, I couldn't tell you specifically how comprehensive they are in a particular domain like that. But I know that they exist, and I know that the coalition itself has a lot of resources like that. Just echoing what you were saying, I'm reminded of a conversation I had with one of our coalition members who mentioned about how to get new students interested in human rights and into the sciences. One of the great benefits, I think, of the human rights concept is its interdisciplinarity, and that it can really unify lots and lots of people who have different interests. And the example that she was talking about was this sort of Bio 172 course, which a bunch of non-science majors came in and would hold their nose because they needed the distribution requirement, and it was Bio 172. Their eyes will glaze over as they talk about, nuclei and mitosis and all that sort of thing. And they reframed it as an experiment as biomedical issues of HIV/AIDS. And they ended up teaching, I think, like 90% of the actual regular Bio 172, but through the lens of HIV, and bringing in not only biologists but people who were living with HIV, and nurses who had shared their experience with how the biology affected people's psychology and the professional lives, et cetera, et cetera. And I see no reason why you couldn't do something very similar to that, with disasters, displacement, and human rights, because it brings together so many different elements, right? From isotope geochemistry to cartography to the physics of sensors and mapping systems, to the psychology of the survivors of trauma and everything else under the sun, practically. And so you're talking about going on the course level, and that example immediately popped in my head, like, yeah, like that. And the punchline to all that is that the enrollment in that class just exploded. This was something that people wanted to take, which would never have happened with Bio 172, right? Even though I think it probably still was, the same course number. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So working with select faculty who are, personally devoted to human rights issues, I've seen that approach work well that Jonathan described. Of, for example, a typical freshman course that would be more like a general education requirement. Our university, I don't know about yours, but we have some general education requirements which are formally labeled as interdisciplinary. We actually call them ID courses. And they're designed to basically have open arms for any student. They could be an art major, they could be theater, anything. Bring them together for general education, but advertise it as a specific topics. So literally this semester, we have a STEM faculty member who is teaching what would be like some boring number like bio XXXX. Instead, he's calling it pandemics of today and the past. And now everybody wants to take it because they're like, oh, I want to know about that, right? And so, and then from the faculty point of view, because you really have the freedom to teach a course any way you want, my advice is look at the learning outcomes in that particular course. And as long as the case studies and the discussion meets the learning outcomes that you can measure, you're good, because that, at the end of the day, that's all that matters, right?
And if you get them early enough, some of them might change their major.
That's right. It could be a great recruitment tool to bring them into your anthropology program or whatever your specific program is.
So I'm uniquely situated in terms of my faculty position, and it, you know, sometimes it's a blessing and sometimes it's a curse. But I'm actually considered research faculty, so only 20% of my time is dedicated to teaching. And so when I work on projects, they generally are bigger picture projects because where my position lives. So I live in the College of Liberal Arts. So I am one of 3 total research faculty positions on my entire campus.
Okay.
This is a fairly new thing that they are starting, and they don't quite know what to do with us. And so in some ways that's good because it's been choose your own adventure. In other ways it's been difficult because, you know, I'll start down a path and apparently that's not the direction I'm supposed to go. And so I'll have to redirect. But, you know, most of the feedback that I'm getting from my dean is that she is expecting more of sort of these big ideas and big picture proposals. And so when I was hired 3 years ago, this was something that came up, is that she was interested in an interdisciplinary human rights program of some sort. And so it got kind of, you know, pushed to the wayside for various reasons related to structuring at the university and curriculum redevelopment and things like that. But I think, you know, it's very timely in terms of revisiting it. So that's sort of where I'm coming from on, you know, I'm hoping not to bite off more than I can chew, but I really like some of these ideas. There are several faculty members that I've already sort of had in mind that teach courses that I think could be very easily redirected. So I'm really glad that you both provided examples that you know, align well with sort of that idea. You know, I think my biggest concern is I do think we have this student interest because we've seen, like I said, we've got this social justice minor that's been created in the past year within our sociology department, and the students are flocking to it. And so I think that there's student interest, but something that has been interesting to me teaching the human rights class, I'd be interested to hear your feedback on what student perceptions were. But when I teach the human rights class, my students, I think, have initially thought that we're going to be doing basically Holocaust studies. You know, that's what they're most familiar with. That's what they think of when they think of human rights abuses. And I think certainly over the last few years, students have become slightly more globally aware of what human rights conversations look like. But my students are often just absolutely shocked when they start learning about all of these things that have happened all over the world, some in their lifetime, some ongoing, some still happening now. And so it's, you know, that's always a real eye opener for me. And coming from UT Knoxville, where so many students enrolled in the university specifically because they were interested in this, and so they had some background knowledge, it's been fascinating to me to see what that need for baseline information is for students.
Well, it sounds like you're in a rich environment to be able to do that, because that really is the key, to have the student interest, right? You know, I know of other campuses that have struggled with enrollments and programs like that. Our history is similar to what you've alluded to, going back actually as far back as the mid 80s. we had a degree in Holocaust, initially Holocaust studies, that then it became Holocaust and genocide studies to broaden it, make it a more global perspective. But even with those changes, it's been frankly a small program. It's a master's degree. So, there are challenges to recruit for something like that, right?
Is there, I wonder, is there a local issue that is somehow might be tied into this? I'm thinking about, thinking back to my own undergraduate experience, and a lot of the environmental science people learned about the watershed issues associated with local farms. We were in rural Pennsylvania, draining to the Chesapeake Bay, and the impact of on marine life and the livelihoods of fishermen and that sort of thing. And I'm just trying to I mean, I don't know anything about the geography of Middle Tennessee, but I'm wondering, you mentioned the Kurdish community, right? Is there some kind of, if, as you described, these are many first generation college students, probably largely from that same geographic area. Is there a way that you can really make this relevant by tying in some issue that they deal with a lot? Be it the local refugee population or some kind of, I don't know, environmental issue, or I don't know.
So Nashville actually has a couple different organizations that have really mobilized to address human trafficking. And so we have some recovery centers for people who have been victims of human trafficking. And we've actually had a couple of students who have gone from our graduate programs into roles and employment within those organizations. And so I'm starting to see, I think, a little more overlap between activities that are being done within the departments at the university that these students are familiar with and some of these organizations. So that might be one place that we could think about that. Another more environmentally focused issue that came to mind as soon as you mentioned that is we've got this landfill issue here in Murfreesboro. And it's all of a sudden over the last couple months become more of an issue. And I think part of it's because people are staying home and engaging in more outdoor activities and things like that. But there's this terrible smell that just sort of encompasses the whole city. And right now, nobody's really sure what's causing it, but they're confident that it's related to our landfill. And our city actually brings in revenue by allowing other neighboring communities to dump their trash in our landfill. So we're essentially collecting trash from Nashville and other suburbs surrounding us. And so this is something that I've talked with a couple colleagues in our biology and chemistry department, as well as a sociology colleague who specializes in disaster responses. So we've kicked around a couple ideas about this. So, that would be something very local and, something we're all painfully aware of right now.
Well, that's the other area that we haven't talked about directly, which is community service and engaging students in fields type projects. Those can be very valuable because I'm sure your campus, like ours, has a lot of student groups, a lot of student organizations. And based on their interests in whatever that student group wants to do, to speak with them about a particular issue like the landfill and see if you can connect them, as you say, like with some science faculty. Maybe you have some scientists that could do like an air analysis, like an atmospheric scientist who could sample air, and the students could collect the data, and then they could be advocates to the local politicians, whether they're state legislatures or whatever level, and teach them how to be advocates and to use evidence to drive the advocacy, which is a big thing for what we do as a coalition, right?
And you could tie that together with health data and economic data about the people who live right nearby the landfill, and the sort of systemic the cascading effects of all that on broader social issues. And then how that impacts the universal, not impacts, but how, how that then implicates universally recognized human rights. Obvious.
Right.
Yeah, no, this is super helpful to talk some of these things out.
It sounds like you're quite far along and already bringing these things to your campus. So that, kudos to you for doing that.
Well, it's a product of liking to do a lot of different things and being interested in a lot of different things. And so my particular area of interest has really been focused on human identification. So something else I was thinking about when you're talking about student organizations, we have, I have a team of students that I work with that whenever we have an active crime scene, so if we have skeletal remains that are discovered, we mobilize, and so the medical examiner and our surrounding area contacts us, and we help with the recovery and we help with the analyses in the lab. And my students are allowed to accompany us to those things, and so those students are, of course, very interested in pursuing future careers within forensic anthropology, and there's a lot of interest from those same students in international applications for that work, which is kind of how I got involved with the project that Jonathan and I are working on together, because there are all these international teams that are trying to address these problems on a larger scale. And, I would love to see some overlap in the training programs that we have. So something that, I'd really like to see is maybe once we're allowed to travel again and do those types of things, some student exchanges and, some more involvement in those programs for our students as well.
And have them submit essays and posters to the Science and Human Rights Coalition meeting. Absolutely.
Yeah. I have a student right now who's in our honors program, and our undergraduate honors program requires them to do a senior thesis project that they work on. And my student had been so excited because she thought she was going to get to travel and collect data. She's double majoring in anthropology and Spanish. And so we thought we were going to be able to hook her up with one of the international teams and do some work in that way.
Oh. And
we got derailed.
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, that's,
well, there will be an opportunity. It's just we all have to be patient, right? Hopefully at some point in 21.
Well, patience is a virtue that is well known to be something college students have in abundance.
But, my other suggestion, and I'm sure you've already thought of this, is one way to take advantage of the current situation where everybody can do it, the four of us are doing right now remotely, that you could bring in various experts into the classroom instruction and your research projects, and invite a group of your research students, for example, to sign in on a session, and then invite someone from anywhere who's an expert in forensic and skeletal analysis or whatever you want to get into. And that's another advantage of the AAAS Coalition, is we have such a great network of people that we've developed over this decade that I'm sure, an email blast or whatever through the online platform, you would be able to find people like myself who wouldn't mind devoting an hour here or there to, having a live conversation. And what could come out of that would be, maybe you'll end up writing a paper together. I've actually had a publication over this pandemic for that very reason. I found a colleague at NYU that otherwise I would have been way too busy to interact with, to travel to the campus and so on. And she and I wrote a paper, and it's already published. So, these things, sometimes you can turn a terrible situation into an opportunity.
I mean, I'm always available to talk if you think it could be helpful.
Absolutely. Well, both of you have volunteered, so. Excellent. Well, I appreciate this conversation a whole lot. It certainly sparked some new ideas and reinforced some things that I was already thinking about. So it's been super helpful.
Good.
So on the subject of the sort of ask me anything, and I'm just kind of curious, I guess. But how did you get into this? Uh, well, what was your career path to your position now, and where did the human rights interest first develop?
Yeah, so I mean, the short story is I was trained in chemistry, so I got my PhD in chemistry. Ended up working in industry for a number of years. I was with Merck doing basic drug discovery research because my drive was to develop medicines to help people. And then I reached a point in that career where I realized how much I like working with students. I would bring in interns into my lab at Merck every summer. And then luckily got an offer for an endowed professorship to do research similar to what Tiffany is doing. It was a research faculty position. And I jumped into that. I loved that work. And as happens with a lot of future administrators, the department chair at that time, after a couple of years, came to me one day and just pointed at me and said, "You're next. You're going to be the next chair," because there wasn't anyone else volunteering for it. And it turned out I love the work. The main thing I enjoyed about it is to create new curriculum, created a new degree program, things like that, and ended up, just following the administrative path. But to answer the question about the human rights, I go back to our previous university president who created the Human Rights Institute. And when I joined Kean, that was back in 2008 when I was new there. The president at that time gave me a walking tour of the campus and proudly pointed out that institute. And, with my science background, I had a lot of questions. I didn't know anything about it. Like, well, why is it here? What's the benefit to students? How could science faculty get involved? And when I started asking questions like that, I wasn't getting many specific answers. And then I reached out and realized, just by pure luck, that was right in early 2009 when the launch of the coalition was happening. It was advertised in Science magazine, and next thing I knew, I was at the coalition, and I found a group of people who were like-minded and who were asking similar questions. So, I've been with it ever since.
Great. Yeah, I mean, my path to this was kind of similar. I have a hard science background in physics and astronomy, and then I went to grad school for planetary science. And my goal and my vision was always that I was just, I was going to go work for NASA, or be at a university as a PI, developing instruments and processing the data, or something like that.
Right.
And I graduated, and I needed my girlfriend got into Georgetown here, so we moved here while she did her grad school, and I needed a job during that time. And she actually found an internship at AAAS that was on the use of satellite imagery in support of human rights investigations. They needed an analyst, because this was at the very dawn of commercial satellite imagery. And I was like, well, can we even use this for human rights? It wasn't really as well known as it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, I certainly know satellite imagery. That's how we know anything about other planets. And yeah, I'm in favor of human rights, sure, and Earth is a planet. So I figured I could do that for, 8 months or whatever, and then I'd go get a real job. That was in 2008. So yeah, that's been quite a ride. Obviously, I enjoyed the work. Obviously, they brought me on full time.
Right. That's great.
It's weird how these things work out like that, So.
Yeah, I'm always encouraging our students to go for internships if they possibly can, for the very reason of your story that you shared, that in so many cases it opens up doors that they would have never predicted. And because a lot of my students don't have the resources to do it, because a lot of the internships are unpaid, one of my joys is to raise funds and find funds that I can earmark for that specific purpose. So I'm able to, as in my office, to sponsor internships so that they can give up their job at the CBS or wherever they're working, which, our typical student, they have to do that to pay tuition. It's just no other choice. So what about your path, Tiffany, to getting into human rights?
So I actually started in cultural anthropology during my undergrad a while back, and this was sort of in that time when anthropology was making a paradigm shift in, sort of this difference between going and observing and not affecting people and their lives versus, advocating for your participants in your research studies. And so I was learning from some old school practitioners who were kind of in that old paradigm of you don't affect the culture that you're working within. And so I sort of felt like I was doing anthropology wrong, but I really loved it. And so I took a few years off and realized that I did not enjoy desk job. And so I decided that wherever I landed, I needed to be in a science field, and I needed to be more intellectually engaged in the kind of work that I was doing. And so during that time, my university got a new faculty that was a forensic anthropologist. And so I actually wound up going back to my university thinking I was just going to do a couple classes and then apply into graduate programs elsewhere. And I wound up staying and doing a master's degree in biology and working with forensic anthropologists and getting a lot of experience in that regard. And so biological anthropology gave me this opportunity to stay within anthropology and to sort of continue considering some of these cultural aspects of humans that I enjoyed, but also to have that kind of work grounded in more of a hard science, which is what I think I was missing during that first experience. Right. And then as I applied into PhD programs, UT Knoxville had this very specific disasters, displacement, and human rights slant to the work that they were doing. And so they were actively engaging with communities internationally. And they were asking some of these questions about how can forensic science help some of these problems, and how can we apply forensic science to a human rights atrocity in Uganda. There's a really fantastic project going on right now with several Ugandan communities in UT Knoxville. I worked with my advisor on some identifications from the Franco regime and the Spanish Civil War. So we actually were able to travel and work with an organization in Spain to help them with the forensic anthropology for their project. And so it gave me what I was looking for. It gave me the hard science. It gave me the opportunity to continue using those elements of the social science that I was drawn to. And it gave me a very purposeful direction for the work that I was doing.
That's great. Good.
And so now I get to sort of apply all of this domestically and locally. So I do a lot of consulting for local and regional law enforcement. And then also, hopefully, we'll get to resume some of these international projects as well. Go ahead.
Do you have a criminal justice program on your campus?
We do, yes.
That's one of our most popular majors.
So for us too, and actually it falls in health and behavioral sciences, and their program just got a beautiful new building on our campus. So they've increased their student enrollment, they've increased the resources that they have available on campus. So Same for us.
So one of the classic questions of an AMA from Reddit, where I believe is where the AMA concept first originated, is would you rather fight one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? So I'll just throw that one out there since this is an AMA session.
Well, I think I would go with the one big one.
Oh yeah, I think a horse-sized duck sounds terrifying. I think the duck-sized horses, I feel like I could just sort of like punt them away from me.
I don't know. Have you ever been to a park where there are geese? I don't know that ducks are as aggressive as geese, but ducks, they could be. And if they were as aggressive as geese.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. But we're talking about duck-sized horses. So what could they really do? Like kick you, I guess, with their little. I mean, horse legs are fragile enough anyway. I feel like a significant blow would just, like shatter their little legs and they'd no longer be a threat.
I thought it was more than more of a philosophical rather than a practical real question.
Well, yeah, I mean,
if you're going to go practical reality, my other concern would be that the group of the hundreds of the little ones would reproduce and get to a point they would overtake the world.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff just wants to see a really big duck too, right?
I do admit 100 duck-sized the duck-sized horses, you could probably, instead of fighting them, you could probably market them as pets and make a killing.
That's right. Well, what else could I advise with? I think that's what you're doing is very interesting.
Well, can you share a little bit more about what the Human Rights Institute on your campus does? Like, are there specific programs that they target, or is it sort of a wide open thing that people bring in their own ideas? How does it function?
Well, the core of what I think keeps it going is it has a very strong connection with the high schools throughout the state. So within New Jersey, there's something like close to 2,000 high schools. And I don't know about Tennessee, but within New Jersey, there's actually a mandate for K-12 education to include Holocaust education into the curriculum. Now, whether it's fully fulfilled is a different discussion, but because of that mandate, we're able to work with the network of high schools and those who have principals and then superintendents that oversee it, who share that mission. We basically do a lot of teacher training to prepare students how to teach different grade levels the topic of Holocaust, which of course then leads to human rights education, within that framework. So that's one thing. And then the other, of course, as I mentioned, is, bringing in speakers to inspire people. We also have programs that connect on the research side by inviting people from other institutions to come in and think about ways to collaborate. So it's really pretty open. The other thing is that we have a space, a gallery space, where we can invite in artists who do specific exhibits. And we've had one recent example is we had someone who had worked with the prison system for most of her career and was an art educator and was teaching prisoners how to do art as a way to, manage the challenging life being incarcerated. And they had a special exhibit of prison art that was pretty extraordinary and discussing about, all the socio-political implications and how it affects their cognitive abilities, things like that. So it's pretty open, but it definitely opens the students' eyes to things that they wouldn't normally think about. So.
Do you all have a resource center of any kind, like a library or anything like that, that you are able to offer students?
Well, there has been, there is and has been a Holocaust Resource Center where it houses like a specific library for that topic. One thing they're very proud of is that they have an extensive collection of tapes of testimonials of Holocaust survivors. That's something they've been, working on archiving over many decades now.
And have, in terms of support from the university, obviously they see value. Do you think it was a hard sell initially, or was it something that was pretty easy to get off the ground?
Well, like I said, I think it requires a dynamic, devoted leader who decides this is what I'm going to do. And, he worked with the board and with outside donors and made it happen. And then once it was established, then it's, permanent presence on campus. It's not to say that it can't come from faculty, but I think you need the buy-in from administration, right?
Absolutely.
So, and it sounds like you're fortunate to have a dean who is committed to supporting that kind of work.
Tiffany, I've put a link to the AAAS database of science and human rights syllabi for
great.
you there.
Good.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
That, and there is an anthropology section to that with about a dozen or so, looks like, different anthropology syllabi, one from 2017. But yeah, so.
Thank you. That is
No problem.
perfect. And in terms of getting involved with the coalition as an individual, are you all involved at the individual level? Or, I mean, obviously, Jonathan, you're affiliated with AAAS. Jeff, are you a part of that as a result of an individual effort or as part of your university's programming?
Well, I got into it through Sigma Xi, the Scientific Research Honor Society. So pretty much from the beginning, I've been the organizational representative.
But we welcome both individual members and organizational members. We have individual faculty. We have representatives from affiliated societies. And quite a few affiliated societies. We even have some retired people, emeritus faculty, who just show up because they're interested. So, yeah, any way you feel like being involved, we are happy to have you.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Any other things I could cover?
Yeah, Jeff, I'm just kind of curious. Has there been any resistance to any of the ideas that we've all talked pretty positively about this, but what have been the challenges in some cases that you've encountered or that you've heard of through your work with the coalition involved in implementing some of these human rights related programs? Has there been skepticism from certain quarters? Is it known, are there certain disciplines where there's more resistance or less resistance? I'm curious about your and perhaps even beyond the university, perhaps from the community or parents or students themselves. What is the resistance? What is the nature of it, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, no, that's a big question. So what comes to mind is in the early days of the coalition, when we were very focused, rightly so, on recruiting as many professional societies as possible. In those discussions, there were individuals who would float in and out of the coalition, who would then go back to their home professional organizations and have that conversation, and then report back to us that basically the conversation hit a wall. In other words, I heard some examples with some engineering areas. I remember there were others, maybe with a physician group. I'm trying to recall, it's been a while, but basically those conversations were that there was some concern of how it could be construed, of us playing a role in that realm of human rights as leaning towards more political than anything else, right? And what I remember is that basically it just kind of got stalled. It just didn't move forward. It's like anything else with new initiatives. You need a real cheerleader, someone who really believes in the mission, who can then advocate and just be persistent and keep trying, right? So, does that help?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Yeah.
Tiffany, I'm just curious, have you in your efforts so far, at least, have you run into similar types of opposition? It's helpful for me, just because as a member of the AAAS staff, I can, when we're discussing potential future programming, that having that knowledge can be
Like I said, my dean is incredibly supportive and had initially sort of brought it up when I was first hired, and then it's kind of fallen by the wayside. I think any opposition that we would face would wind up coming from our community. And I think it would be all about the framing, because right now I work with the Forensic Institute for Research and Education, or FIRE. And so, of course, everyone is so excited about forensic science. So, you can introduce a lot of different topics, and you can get away with a lot of conversations if you frame them with this forensic science slant to them. And so I've approached it so far as being kind of sneaky. So Jonathan, I think you knew we were trying to host Freddie Petrarelli from the Guatemalan team, and he had to cancel his trip because of COVID. But one of my goals is to start introducing speakers into our very successful, we have a Legends in Forensic Science lectureship. And so Freddie was going to come and talk about the identification efforts in Guatemala. And I was hoping that we would also start looking at other presenters who had a little bit of this international work or sort of humanitarian or human rights slant to some of the things that they do. Like Jason De Leon, he was someone that I was really interested in hosting. And, he works with the material artifacts that are found close to the border from undocumented migrants as they cross the border. And so sort of thinking about introducing programming in that way and seeing how it's received within the community and moving forward there. We've had some efforts. We have a building on campus that is our Army ROTC building that is named after Nathan Bedford Forrest. And for 20 years now, there have been these ongoing efforts to try to get that building renamed. And I've sort of watched that play out over time. And so, I think that's a great example of some of the things that have strongholds within our community, and some of the messaging that our community doesn't fully understand the implications of what that name means to members of our community, and how that negatively impacts a large portion of our student and community populations. And so what I've been pleased to see is that over the last few years, those efforts have re-energized, and I think moved forward in a lot of ways. And so just thinking about the problem solving for things like that, and not aggressively resisted, but certainly I think that there's a lot of room in our community for conversations surrounding humanitarian and human rights issues that could benefit a lot of people. And I love the idea of incorporating high school students in K through 12 education into this. So I'm a huge advocate for science outreach. I do a lot of school visits. We talk about science, from a skeletal biology perspective, and we sneak some forensic science in there. We do a summer camp for students. So that's certainly something that I'm super passionate about. And the idea of incorporating that into any of our efforts is really appealing to me as well.
Great, good.
One resource that you might want to take a look at also, in addition to our program, Tiffany, is you mentioned the local community as potentially a source of resistance and some of their conservatism, to the extent that some of that might be related to religion. We have a dialogue on science, ethics, and religion that has done quite a bit of outreach specifically to evangelical communities and other communities that for whom simply bringing up science immediately, in some cases, provokes sort of a defensive crouch. That my identity is now being attacked, simply because science is now part of the conversation. And we've done a lot of work, or they've done a lot of work to help build bridges with those communities to say, look, we're not telling you what to believe. And that includes bringing in scientists themselves who are evangelical Christians and who have said, this is how I conceive of science. This is how it relates to my faith, et cetera. I don't know to what extent any of that might be applicable, but it is something that AAAS is heavily involved in as part of our mission to make sure that as many people as possible understand the scientific enterprise and are willing to engage in it, irrespective of whatever their faith or other background may be.
No, that's super helpful to me. That's helpful to me as an anthropologist because I teach a gen ed class in world prehistory, and I always have a little bit of pushback in that class from some of my students from evangelical Christian families who, just exactly as you've described, think that the moment we start talking about evolution, we're challenging their faith. And so
and I just want to be clear, this program is beyond simply evangelicals. That was my assumption based on, frankly, my prejudice about Tennessee.
Geographically, it's spot on. It's spot on, absolutely.
Well, there are many other religions and engagements, but I'm going to put the link to that program into there it is, the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion.
And thank you, Jeff, for sharing your link.
Yeah, I was going to say I added a link for our Human Rights Institute so you could look at some of the resources.
Absolutely. And I hope you both know that I'm going to be in touch with you about all of these things we've talked about.
Please.
By all means.
You can go ahead and start working on your Zoom sessions with my classes now if you want to.
and that is interesting, Jonathan. Recently, I had a conversation with a well-known chemist at MIT. His name is Troy Van Voorhees. He's actually the department chair there. And he's well known for being an advocate and a public speaker as someone who is deeply devoted to his Christian beliefs, to talk about the role of science in his life and how it impacts faith. It really comes down to like faith versus reason type discussion, right? So I think it's interesting to bring up examples like that the two don't necessarily have to be impossible, which I think the general public feels that way, right?
Yeah.
But that's really the public narrative, is you can't be both.
Right. And I mean, I think a lot of that, as you were saying, has simply to do with exposure to scientists, right? If you spend your entire life hearing about scientists in the abstract or through movies or whatever, right, you get this idea, for me personally, for me personally, it wasn't until I was an undergrad and, one of my advisors for my physics and astronomy professors is a devout Catholic. And I actually just, had long conversations with him about how he conceives of his faith in regard to the fact that he's a cosmologist. But being exposed to scientists, I think, is one of the most effective ways, because scientists are like any other group of people. They're a very diverse group of people with very diverse beliefs. Right. And so I think that's why, what you're talking about, Tiffany, about, going into high schools and saying, this is, I'm a scientist, right? And that's how you do it is really, really important. I'm also reminded of when I was in grad school and I was TAing the introductory geology class. And, one of the questions during our orientation was, well, what do we do if we get that sort of thing, right? We're talking about, geologic time and millions of years. It's a large state university. Someone's going to get a young Earth creationist, right? What are you going to say? And the answer that I got that resonated the most with me is, I'm going to talk about science. My role here is to teach you about science as practiced by scientists, and how that's one way of learning about the world, and it's not necessarily the only one. But my role isn't to tell you what to believe; it's to tell you about how scientists conceive of that world, and you make your own judgments there. But anyway,
yeah. I mean, I've always seen the goal of teaching scientists to prepare students to appreciate how to think like a scientist. That I think is the key.
Yeah.
Because the information itself is always changing.
Right.
So it's not about, well, here's this fixed amount of information. If you digest it and spit it back to me, then you move on, right?
Right.
It's more about you're going to learn how to think the way scientists do, and that applies to all fields. You could be teaching history. It's all about thinking like a historian, right? It's not about having this encyclopedic mind where you know all the events and people and dates.
Right. It's the process, not the body of knowledge. But that can be complicated, of course, by the fact that it's a process that's been ongoing for so long and has developed such a body of knowledge, right? And that in order to understand where things are right now, you going back and nobody has time to do every single experiment that has led up to this point. So there's some level of trust that has to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great example of some of the intersections that we talk about in my forensic science and human rights class. And I also teach a class in forensic science and popular culture. And in both of those classes, we start with talking about, how we define science and who has access to science, and, how we put so much emphasis on science. And then we even add more to that in a lot of ways when we think about forensic science. And so that seems to resonate with my students a lot when we really break it down that way. We brainstorm, like, what do you think about when you think about science? And of course it's test tubes and, chemicals and things like that. And then we ask about forensic science, and, it's like that dimly lit room and all of the cool stuff. Exactly. They say that every time. They say those blue neon lights, and so so we start breaking it down that way. And I think that could be potentially useful in answering this other question too about different ways of processing information, whether it's through religion or through science. So yeah, that's a neat conversation to have, for sure.
And you can also bring up, of course, that now it's when people talk about what their conception of science is, when you can say, and it's a human right because of Article 15 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. We have the right to benefit from scientific progress and its applications.
It blows their minds when we start talking about civil and political rights versus economic, social, civil rights. They've never thought about it that way before. They just never thought about it.
I'm sure.
Well, we're beyond the 60 minutes, so we've successfully had a discussion for the entire time. This was originally said that it was going to be a 60 to 90 minute thing, so we can keep going if you want, but I just wanted to let you know that there's no obligation. Not that there ever really was, but
Right.
If we want to keep talking, that's fine. If there are other things that everyone wants to move on towards, that's also fine. But
if you feel like we've covered most, I'm good with that. I don't mind staying a few more minutes.
Yeah, this has been, I can't stress to you enough how incredibly helpful this has been, and just sort of thinking through some of the ideas that hadn't quite gelled into something tangible. Right. This has really sort of given me a bigger vision than I had when I started. So I want to make sure that you both know this has been super helpful.
Good to hear.
That's wonderful to hear.
Well, and I feel so special because I got like all of this knowledge and attention all to myself.
Well, I'll be happy if you can share that with students and other faculty so that the conversation can keep going. And that's the benefit of any conversation like this. Even if just one person walks away and then changes or does something new, then it was totally worthwhile.
Absolutely. And I'm serious that you're both going to be class visitors at some point. So be ready.
Sounds great. And yeah, please do keep me updated on the progress of the broader initiative, alongside the project that we're working on.
Yeah. So Jonathan, you'll have to do a virtual tour of our lab. We've just gotten some new equipment into the lab. We're sort of piecemealing together a lab. So Jeff, over the past 3 years, I've been at MTSU as a primarily teaching institution with this new interest in research.
Right. Yeah.
Like I said, they don't quite know what to do with me. Again, falling into liberal arts, they're used to buying pianos or,
Right.
stage lighting. So when I go to them and say that I want a microbalance that, costs $30,000, and I wind up having to explain to them, it's just a really expensive scale, and so breaking down what the needs of a laboratory are, has challenged my science communication a lot, but it also has been beneficial because they get super excited over each new thing that we bring in. So for example, we just got a mixer mill. So it's got these, 2 little canisters on either side, and it basically just, is like a miniature ball mill that grinds up the samples that we have in a more efficient way. They're so excited about it. I sent them a video, and my dean and the associate dean can't get enough of it. So you all are welcome to do a virtual lab tour with us sometime. But all these different moving pieces to try to build up something both scientific and also socially conscious and kind of always having an eye toward human rights applications of the work that we do. That's something that's important to me to communicate to my students, is that while we're engaging in science, there's an application for what we're doing, and it has meaningful impact and can. So they seem to be really inspired by that.
Good. It sounds like you're doing all the right things. I just hope it can grow and affects more and more students who are going to be the generations after us that will create our new future, right? I mean, that's one of the great things about being an educator. So,
absolutely.
All right. Well, I enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise.
Me too. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you both for without you, there is no us. So.
So feel free to reach out whenever.
Absolutely, I will. Well, thank you both for your time.
You're welcome.
No problem. Yep. All right. Take care.
All right.
See you later.
Yeah.
Be well.